Alex, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, you've been playing it, you've been staring at it for over 100 hours. How many hours have you got in it now?
Now, it's probably, at the time of recording, it's probably more like 120, 125 hours.
So in typical game sequel fashion, it's doing everything that the first game did, but bigger, better, possibly in some cases worse. But we've got 5 reasons why Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is better than Final Fantasy VII Remake.
It's funny, actually, if you look at the meta score, not that it matters, but I remember that Remake ended up at 87 or 88, and then Rebirth has ended up at about 93, and I have fallen into the category where I feel like Remake should have been a little bit higher, and Rebirth should have been a little bit lower, and to me they're both about a 90. Rebirth is just so much enhanced in so many ways, and so I guess the first point on this list is that the open world zones are huge, massive, enormous. They're just gigantic. The way the game works is there's 6 zones. They are grasslands, which is the area around Calm, the Junon area. So that is home to the city of Junon, which is the city with a giant cannon pointing out into the sea, pointing at another country. There's the Coral area, so that is home to the Costa del Sol, the Coral Town, which is sort of a ruined town, and the Gold Saucer. The Coral area is a mix of forest and desert. There is the Gongaga area, which is home to the town of Gongaga. That's an interesting one because that was not in the original Final Fantasy VII. Well, basically, it wasn't really denoted as a specific area, and there was one tiny, completely optional, completely missable event in Gongaga where if you just didn't happen to go into the town or the reactor, you just wouldn't see this event. But that's a town that plays a pretty big role in the extended universe that's happened since Final Fantasy VII, the original, came out. It's the hometown of Zack, the protagonist of Crisis Core. So that's all expanded out, and you might see some things and some people from Crisis Core when you go there. And then there's the Cosmo area, which is Cosmo Canyon and the surrounding area. So that's sort of, I should mention, so grassland is grassland, Junon is rocky, Gongaga's a fantasy forest with giant mushrooms and stuff like that.
The Morrowind bit.
It's the Morrowind bit. Cosmo is wild westy red desert, like you're in America. And then the Nibble area is Nibelheim, so it's got that town, and it's sort of, again, mountainous, and there's quite a lot of water there. So you've got those 6 areas, and you work through each of them. And each of those areas has a bunch of different tasks and side tasks and things to do. And it's not like Ubisoft icon vomit of loads and loads of stuff. But there's usually between 4 and 6 hunts, combat trial sort of style things. There's always 4, they're called proto-relic missions, which are a specific quest that sort of dovetails across all the regions. Resource areas that you scan, and that reveals places you can go digging with your chocobo to unlock new crafting recipes. You're getting the idea. So they're big open world zones with a lot to do. I think I can best sum it up in, when I got to the Gold Saucer, the counter on the PS5 menu that tells you how far in a game you are said I was 50% of the way through the game, and that was at, I think, the 35 hour mark. The Gold Saucer is then followed by 2 pretty big open world zones, and I noticed that when I hit 66% on that PS5 menu, I'd been playing for 60 hours. So 50% to 66% of completion, which really is only based on the main story progression, I was noodling around for 25, 30 hours, which shows you what these open zones are like. So yeah, they're good.
It's got one of the best soundtracks of all time, as far as you're concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was true of Remake too. So I think they sort of they go together in this sense. But what I think is really nice in Rebirth is they're starting to get a little bit more confident. So Remake has a little bit of new music, but he's quite sparing about it. Yeah. And mostly it's just really playing those hits, with the odd new. Usually in Remake, the new music is strictly tied to new concept changes. It's the Whispers have a theme, and Jessie has a theme because she's got an expanded role and stuff like that. But this actually goes a little bit further and is just no, for specific events, we're going to have some lovely all new tracks. They reckon there's over 400 tracks, they said. And some of them are just incredible. And you can't quite believe how there are beautiful, lavish arrangements that play for one tiny little sequence when they absolutely could have got away with just using a standard thing. And there's bosses that have completely unique individual arrangements of existing tracks or all new tracks, and they totally could have got away with just popping the generic boss theme on it, but they don't. It's an amazing soundtrack. And actually, the last full dungeon of the game, which I think if you played the original Final Fantasy VII, you know where it is, but I won't say the name of it. But the music in that dungeon, the design of the music is just incredible in terms of that knows when to be quiet, it knows when to build dread, it knows when to be a little bit more hopeful. And that's sort of the thing that was brilliant about Remake that's carried forth here on a much larger scale, is these games are just amazing about like using like motifs. So you'll get songs that blend together, and I think a really lovely example of that is a Nibelheim flashback where it's Cloud fighting alongside Sephiroth as a youngster, and you have a boss theme that is sort of a mix of classic Final Fantasy VII Let the Battles Begin main random encounter fight music, but then they're weaving in, because you're fighting alongside Sephiroth, they're weaving in bits of Those Chosen by the Planet, One Winged Angel, all those Sephiroth sort of themes are woven into this battle theme in a wonderful way, and that sort of stuff is right throughout the game. It's brilliant.
And you get to spend more time with the classic characters in this game than you ever have.
Well, yeah, I mean, because this single game is significantly longer than the original game. The original game is only 30-40 hours, even if you're a completionist. Maybe a bit longer back on PS1 in terms of you didn't have the fast forward and it only ran at like 18 frames a second. But yeah, you get to spend a lot of time with them, and it's really intricately, beautifully done in the sense that they make sure every character's got time to shine. When you're in the open world, you have your whole cast with you, everyone's all together, and like the people who aren't in your party stand on the sideline just sort of firing random little shots here and there, but aren't actually really doing any damage. But anytime there's a dungeon or a side quest, they've got set characters. So it might be this side quest is tied to Tifa, so you're spending time with her. She's the character that's alongside you in all the cutscenes. Or you go off on a specific dungeon. It's just like, right, we're going to split the characters up. This is the bit where Barrett and Red 13 go off together on their own, and they have some time together and they have banter. And some of the characters go together just so beautifully, and in ways that someone, as a lifelong Final Fantasy VII fan, there's pairings and relationships that I never anticipated. Like Barrett and Yuffie's relationship is absolutely brilliant. They sort of have a father-daughter, he's slightly annoyed, she's cute and bubbly, but actually you realise that under the hood, they're both quite similar. They're both quite hurt, quite scarred people, in fact, hurt by the same people. It's all beautifully done. The character models are sublime. There's some moments in this game where people are on the verge of tears or holding something back, and it's all there in the facial expressions, even though this is quite a stylized game. This isn't Last of Us or whatever. This isn't Mass Effect, but there's dialogue choices and things like that, and that impacts some key scenes in the game, just as in the original game, but just, again, amped up. So what was a 2-minute date sequence in the original game, where whichever character you got closest to would, through a handful of dialogue options, would be your date for the night. In this game, that's a whole huge thing that the whole game really builds up to. The world itself is so beautifully realised, and a lot of these towns feel bigger than they did in the original Final Fantasy VII, which obviously most towns in the original Final Fantasy VII were only 2 or 3 screens anyway, but they felt very big because of the zoomed out camera angle, because you could go into lots of interior stuff like that. They just felt very big. In Rebirth, everything is even bigger still, and even though like Junon is clearly a huge metropolitan area that thousands of people live in and you only have a tiny bit of it to explore, the bit of it they give you to explore, the scale and the sense of wonder and stuff is there, and everything appears as I sort of imagined it. Yeah, I really think the people who were in charge of the world design just knocked it out of the park, and I don't think you can even really have a debate about the quality of the world design. The world design is excellent. I think people will have more of a debate about some of the story decisions, but that's a different topic. First of all, there's Remake, and this is the same thing but different. So all of the foundations of the combat system and the way it plays, the way it feels, the way it looks, all of that is building directly on Remake, and that's really rare for Final Fantasy, where obviously this is a series that typically throws stuff out between every single entry. And you want to know why this is the highest rated Final Fantasy game on Metacritic since 9? It's because they weren't starting from zero. And it makes a huge difference. Mass Effect 2, one of my favourite games of all time, would not be one of my favourite games of all time if they didn't have the slightly shitey
Careful now.
Mass Effect game that came before it. So my point is, they're building on Remake, so it's the same thing, but it's different, and there's loads of new mechanics, and there is a real feel that this is a kitchen sink approach, where if anyone had a good idea, they were like, yeah, put it in, whatever. Down to, like, from the way weapon systems and stuff like that interact and work, some of which I think actually makes the materia system a little bit less valuable, which is bit of a shame. But right down to the sheer number of mini games where you just get the impression that someone on their lunch hours was fiddling around and went, you know what, I can build a pretty good version of Rocket League where you play as Red 13 and dogs in this engine. And someone went, yeah, okay, put that in, we'll have that as a mini game in Costa del Sol. Or someone went, you know what, I can build Fall Guys here, Fall Guys from Wish.com, where you play as frogs. We've got the assets for when people get turned into a frog because of the status effects, so we'll make a Fall Guys where you play as frogs and you're jumping around.
Yeah.
And someone was like, yeah. The director was like, yeah, okay, put it in. And so there's a lot of that. And then there's the narrative element compared to the original Final Fantasy VII, which, yes, it's the same thing, it's hitting the same big beats, but it is different. There's quite often you do a story sequence which is very, very close to the original game, and then literally the second that story sequence wraps up, the game turns on a dime and introduces something new. Does that a few times. And so it is the same thing. You'll be familiar, you'll remember where it went if you played the original and know where it's going, but it will surprise you. And I'm not talking about the, ooh, what's going to happen to Aerith thing, or even the, like, what's the deal with Zack. I'm just talking about in the nuts and bolts of the story. You will go to Cosmo Canyon and you will do that wonderful Red 13 quest that you do in Cosmo Canyon that I think a lot of people remember very fondly. And then some other stuff will happen. And it does a lot of that.